We are delighted to be joined by author Joe Rigney. Hello and welcome to Exposit The Word, Joe.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here. Before we talk about your brand new book, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm a professor of theology and literature at Bethlehem College and Seminary in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It's a school that was founded by Dr. John Piper, and I'm also a pastor here in the Twin Cities in St. Paul, one of a team of pastors at a church plant. We're 5 years in, so I don't know when you graduate from being a church plant to being a real church. But we're five and a half years in now, and so I'm a pastor there at Cities Church. And I'm married to my wonderful wife, Jenny, and we have 3 boys, Sam, who's 11, Peter, who's 9, and Jack, who is 20 months.
Yeah.
And then just a few weeks ago, we added a puppy to our lives because 2020 wasn't hectic enough.
Yeah.
So we decided that a puppy would just cap it off. So we've got Crockett.
Yeah.
Our golden doodle.
Amazing. I'm now going to tear up all of the questions I had planned for you and now focus the interview on puppies, babies, and church planting, Joe.
There you go. That's perfect. I'm ready.
Yeah. So just really quickly, how have you found for 5 years of planting a church? I'm really interested in that, Joe.
It's been great. So we planted out of Bethlehem Baptist Church, which was where Pastor Piper was at for 30 years.
Yeah.
So we planted in 2015 as a team.
Yeah.
So there we planted with we didn't do the typical sort of airdrop the church planter in.
Yeah.
But we'd all lived in the Twin Cities for at that point about 10 to 15 years each.
Yeah.
And so we were all really good friends. The kind of core pastoral team. We're all close friends. We'd walk through a lot of suffering together, just in life, and had been in the same small group and that sort of thing. And so then we just kind of like emerged out of the church, and planted with about 40 or so initial members. So it's kind of a little bit of an unusual way of church planting, but it was also really great. And so we've grown now. We have about 300 members presently.
Yeah.
And 8 pastors. 9 pastors now. I think we just added another one. So, but pastor and elder for us are interchangeable. I don't know what the terms are over there, but for us, but we kind of have a different. I don't know if it's different. There are churches who do it, but rather than have simply one main preacher, we have there's 3 of us who really share the bulk of the load, and then all of our elders preach semi-regularly. So I preach about a quarter of the time. Our lead pastor preaches about half the time. Another guy preaches, a quarter, a little bit less, and then the other guys fill in from there. So it's been really kind of a fruitful way to do it. It makes Sunday mornings a little bit less stressful, especially when all of us have young children.
Sure.
And so trying to navigate those things. But it's been really great. The Lord's been good to us in terms of the growth and some baptisms and things like that.
Wow.
And we've had to weather a number of different storms. We've had building issues from the beginning in terms of where we could meet. Our original location actually blew up, literally, like had a gas leak and the building exploded.
Wow.
2 people died. There was a school, and it was a horrible situation. And then that kind of put us out on the street. And so then we were meandering around, and we finally this year we had landed in a building, and it was an old Episcopal church. Historic Episcopal church here in St. Paul, and we were renting it, and then this year it came available to buy, and so we purchased it back in February, and then haven't been able to use it because of coronavirus.
Wow!
So we have this great new building that we were really excited. Now it's ours, and we've been doing online and then meeting in parks over the summer.
Yeah. Wow. So how did you actually become a Christian?
I grew up in West Texas, and my family attended church. I would say kind of when I was younger, I would say nominal Christians. And then when I was about, I want to say 8 or 9, we moved from the church that we'd been at since I was a baby. I was baptized we were a Presbyterian church, but my parents moved across town to kind of the large Baptist church, and really kind of got connected there in a Sunday school class, and that's where my my parents' faith, I think, really solidified. And so I was converted through the preaching of that church. My dad and I actually were baptized together when I was about 12. So he'd never been baptized, and so I became a Christian there when I was about 12, and then just kind of grew up in what I would say normal American evangelicalism. In Texas, and then from there I went off to college at Texas A&M University, and it was there that I encountered the ministry of John Piper, and that was kind of a world-shaping, paradigm-shaping encounter for me, where Christian hedonism and God is most glorified in me when I'm most satisfied in Him. That really resonated. I saw that in the Bible, and so I went all in on that. And so then when it came time, I felt the call to ministry. When it came time to decide where to go, that was top of the list. Was to come to Bethlehem and do the apprenticeship there. And so in the providence of God, I moved up here in 2005. It was the same year I got married. So I actually moved here about 2 months before I got married. So I moved up and then went back and got a wife, and then drove her up into the cold from Texas, right? So the southern United States up into the tundra of Minnesota as it got colder and darker and colder and darker the farther north we went. And she was wondering what she'd gotten herself into, I think. But we've been here now for 15 years, and it's been great. I from after going to school at Bethlehem, I stuck around and helped to launch our college program. And then as a part of that, then have kind of perpetually been in school. I've been perpetually in school since I was 5. I'm almost 38. So just it's been a long journey. But thankfully, this past October, a year ago, I defended my dissertation and finally got the doctorate and was given the degree in March from Union School of Theology there in the UK. My supervisor was Michael Reeves, who some of your listeners may be familiar with.
That's right, That's amazing. I have no idea how you've had time to write a book, but you have, and we're really pleased you have. Your new book, Strangely Bright. Give us an overview of it, and tell us how you actually came to write it as well, Joe.
So this book is it's actually kind of a strange way to write a book, I suppose. So I mentioned, I became a Christian hedonist. So someone who believes that God's passion for His glory and our passion for joy come together, and we glorify God by delighting in Him in college. And that embracing that as kind of the biblical way of approaching life solved some problems, like what do I do with this desire for happiness? But it created other problems, like okay, if I'm supposed to treasure God above everything, if He's the most important, what do I do with all the other stuff? What do I do with all the other good things in my life, like my wife and my kids and my food and so forth? And there's a tension there that I think a lot of Christians feel. And I felt that tension for years. And so I want to say now it's been 7 or 8 years ago, I really started thinking I want to write on this. And so that it basically became a book called The Things of Earth, Treasuring God by Enjoying His Gifts, which came out a couple of years ago. And that was a big book. That was kind of like I don't remember how many pages, but it was a substantial book. And I was really happy with it, and it really explored this in a lot of facets, that question of how do we glorify God through the things He's made. But one of the things that stuck with me about it is I think because it was a big book, it was hard for some people to really get into. It was intimidating. I'm a professor, and so I sometimes write like one. And so there were some barriers, and I really wanted more people to be able to get the heart of that book, even if they didn't get all of the details. And so from there, I worked with Crossway and said, could we do kind of not just like a condensing, not just pull out excerpts, but like a re-envisioning, shorter, more accessible, still have all the beer and the bacon, but really get something that's a little bit tighter, that is the sort of book you could give to really any lay Christian to help them as they think through how do they glorify God through the things He's made. And they were willing to do it, and so Strangely Bright was born.
Excellent. Sounds good. So you've mentioned this term a couple of times, Christian hedonism. Tell us about what that actually is, Joe.
Yeah, so it's a provocative term that Pastor Piper coined. Although in some ways, I think it actually goes back to C.S. Lewis. The concepts are ancient, Bible, church history. The terminology, even C.S. Lewis says that God is a hedonist at heart, and talks a lot about the quest for joy and things like that. So he's had a profound influence on Piper. But the basic idea is that we're all wired for pleasure. We can't help. It's an inescapable fact about human beings that we want to be happy. We want to seek pleasure. And what Piper, in his own way, has communicated is drawn out from the scriptures that, yes, we were created for that because we were made to be happy in God. And so the way that we glorify God, the way we honor and magnify his worth and value, is by delighting in him supremely above everything else. He's our treasure. He's our highest joy. In his presence is fullness of joy. At his right hand are pleasures forevermore. That sort of core idea, that's how we glorify God. That's the basic Christian hedonist truth. He sums it up as God is most glorified in me when I am most satisfied in him. Yeah. And so that's Christian hedonism. And I think it's faithful, it's biblical. I think you see it throughout the theologians of church history, communicating it in their own way, but the substance is there.
Yeah. It's a common tension in the Christian life to feel pulled between loving God above all things and loving and enjoying the things on this earth. What is the biggest misconceptions for someone struggling with this tension?
Yeah, so I think there's a number of them. So one of them is there's a danger of worldliness, which I think people rightly feel. And I think one of the things that Piper has gone around doing is trying to explode a kind of worldliness that's very comfortable and at ease in modern society, and that just wants to live a good middle-class lifestyle and not go to hell. Yeah. And he wants to say there's more than that. God made us for more than that. Jesus purchased more than that for us. We should not settle for mud pies in the slums when we're offered eternal joy in God himself. Mm-hmm. That's one danger. But then if you embrace that, if that settles in and you really believe everything's about God, I exist for him, I exist to find my deepest delight in him, and then you run into Bible passages like Psalm 73, whom have I in heaven but you, and on earth there is nothing I desire besides you. Mm-hmm. And you say, yeah, that's a faithful prayer. That's a good prayer. I want to pray that. I want to sing that. But then you have to ask, but do I really mean it? There's nothing on earth I desire besides you. Like I don't desire anything else other than God. And then that's what creates this tension where you look down, you're singing that at church, and then you look down the row at your family and go, well, I kind of desire them. Yeah. And then you think about lunch later in the day and you say, I kind of want that too. Yeah. So what do I mean when I say there's nothing on earth I desire besides you? So that's, I think, the tension. I think the misconception is that because of truths like that in the Bible, that Jesus is better, the steadfast love of the Lord is better than life, or I count everything as rubbish compared to knowing Christ Jesus. Because of those passages, that then what we're called to do as Christians is keep everything else at arm's length. We don't really enjoy your family, don't really enjoy your food, don't really enjoy your hobbies or creation or things that God has made. Keep them at arm's length because you don't want them to become idols. There's a good pious desire underneath it, but it kind of gets twisted into a wrong kind of guilt orientation to earthly goods that I don't think honors God, and I don't think is what he intends. And so I think a big part of the book is trying to relieve and reorient that low-grade guilt that people feel whenever they really enjoy an earthly pleasure. Yeah.
In that reorientation, you describe two different approaches to loving God and also loving his gifts. What are these two approaches, Joe?
Right. So I basically say when I read the Bible, we have this one set of passages, which I already mentioned, what I call totalizing passages. They're the ones that basically say, it's all God. Nothing I desire besides you. Everything's rubbish compared to knowing Jesus. I set my mind on things above, not on things on the earth. That's one set of passages. But there's this other set of passages which basically says God richly provides us with everything to enjoy, 1 Timothy 6, or everything created by God is good. Nothing is to be rejected if it's received with thanksgiving, 1 Timothy 4. Every good and perfect gift comes down from the Father of lights, James chapter 1. Yeah. So there's these two different sets of passages, and what I say is they really give us two different approaches to God and his gifts. The first set, those totalizing passages, give us a comparative approach. And what I mean by that is basically, take a set of scales and put God on one side of the scales and put everything else on the other. And then you say, which one is more valuable and which one do I want? If I can only have one, which one do I want? Which one do I need? Which one must I have? And the only answer for a Christian is God himself. Yeah. And that's what's being communicated in there's nothing I desire besides you. If I only can have God or the world, everything in the world, I want God. I was made for him. That's a comparative approach. Yeah. The other passages give us what I call an integrated approach, where you don't set God and his gifts in sort of opposition to each other, separating them to compare them and how valuable they are. But instead, in the words of Charles Simeon, we enjoy God in everything, and we enjoy everything in God. And so they're integrated, they come together. And so in this way of thinking, which I think is all over the Bible, the things of earth are essentially avenues, ways that God reveals himself to us, and therefore that we can follow these things of earth back to find a deeper and more lasting satisfaction in him, because we know that he's the source of all these things. He gave them to us so that we would enjoy them and so that we would know him through them. And so those are the two approaches, and the book is basically me trying to talk about how those two approaches relate to one another and how we should use them in a very practical way.
Yeah, so good. What can Christians do to help guard against us becoming really greedy?
Right, well, so this is the danger, right? As soon as you start telling people that God richly provides you with everything to enjoy. I mean, that passage, I don't think we really think about how striking that passage is in 1 Timothy, because in 1 Timothy 6, Paul tells Timothy he has a word for the rich in this present age. So this is a word for rich people, which probably, if we live in the West, is all of us. Yeah. Compared to everybody who's ever lived in history, we are unfathomably wealthy. Yeah. So this is addressed to us, and the first parts of that exhortation are things that we would expect. Don't be haughty. Don't be proud. Rich people can be proud. Don't be proud. If you're rich, don't be proud. Don't set your hope on the uncertainty of riches. Rich people do that. They trust in their riches and not in God, but they're uncertain. Moths can break in, or moths can rust, destroy, thieves break in and steal. Yeah. Don't set your hope. So far, so good. Set your hope on God. Yes, we're Christian hedonists. All of that makes sense. And then he reminds the rich that this God that they're to hope in richly provides them with everything to enjoy. Mm-hmm. And it just pulls me up short, and I think, well, I don't know that you want to say to the rich that God gave them all their stuff to enjoy. That really maybe begins to sound a little bit like the health, wealth, and prosperity gospel. And we don't want to go there, right? Yeah. Paul, help us out. Well, the thing is, Paul doesn't stop there. He says God richly provides us with everything to enjoy, and then he says they are to be generous, open-handed, ready to share, rich in good works. And so he says it's not just that God gives you these gifts for your enjoyment, but he gives them to you so that you can be a channel and an avenue of blessing to others, to sacrifice for the good of others. So I say in the book that generosity is a fundamental test to see whether your integrated joy, enjoying God and everything in God, is really a joy in God, or is it an idolatrous enjoyment of the gifts? Yeah. How do you tell? Well, can you part with the gifts? Can you receive them, enjoy them in a fitting way, and then send them on? Use your time and your talent and your treasure in service of others, loving others, denying yourself in order that others might be happy in God. So generosity is a really fundamental test so that this doesn't become the kind of worldliness that, say, the Apostle John says, don't love the world or the things in the world, right? I'm writing a book about, hey, love the world and the things in the world, and you have a Bible verse that says the opposite. Well, we mean different things. He means don't enjoy them in this idolatrous way. Don't set your hope on them. And I'm saying, right, don't set your hope on them. Set your hope on God. But once you've done that, they're still there, and God intends to reveal himself to you in them. Yeah.
You touched on it a second ago. You mentioned self-denial. What does biblical self-denial actually look like, and practically, how does that play out in a Christian's life?
I think this is a big question. I think this is where C.S. Lewis is so helpful. Because he I forget where it is in his writings, but he distinguishes between what he calls Christian self-denial and pagan self-denial. And pagan self-denial is basically you deny yourself whatever it is you're denying because it's bad, right? So you don't eat that food because it's bad. You don't drink that drink because it's bad. You abstain from sex or marriage because it's bad. And that's, in the biblical terms, that's demonic. Like Paul says, the teaching of demons is, abstain from marriage and foods that God created to be enjoyed. And so that's pagan self-denial. Biblical self-denial says, I'm going to deny myself this thing because it's good.
Yeah.
It's because it's good that I'm going to give it up. And that seems strange to us. But it's not that strange. It's I'm denying myself this lesser good in order that I can have the ultimate good that is God. So, and even in that, the ultimate good who is God that we get in return for our self-denial comes to us in 1,000 ways through the things that he has made. So it's interesting that when Jesus commends self-denial, there's this great passage in Scripture where Peter comes to Jesus. I think it's after the rich young ruler just got sent away, and Jesus says it's hard for the rich to enter the kingdom, easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. And Peter goes, Lord, we left everything to follow you. Like, hey, look at me. I'm denying myself.
Yeah.
And Jesus says, he's not super impressed.
Yeah.
He says, look, whoever has left father and mother and houses and, wives, if you've left those things for my sake, you will receive back in this life houses and mothers and brothers and wives, and in the age to come, eternal life. Now, it's a puzzling thing because you go, well, so you're saying if I leave my wife for the sake of Jesus, I get a wife back? If I leave my house for the sake of Jesus, I get a house back? That doesn't seem to always happen. But I think the point is that what Jesus is communicating is whatever you gave up is you never come out on the short end of that stick, right? If you give something up, God gives it back. And he might give it back. You give up your family because they don't like that you became a Christian. And then what does God give you? He gives you the church, a new family to embrace you as your true brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers. And then ultimately you get in the age to come eternal life. And so there's no losing in self-denial. So the self-denial is important. It's a call. It's Calvary Road. Take up your cross. Be like Jesus and move toward need and toward suffering. But do so knowing that whatever you give up, God will give back to you with interest.
Yeah. You've touched on it a few moments ago about the prosperity gospel and also self-denial there, Joe. I mean, it's a very different thing, isn't it? It's a heart thing in terms of you see the language used by a lot of the prosperity teachers in terms of sowing a seed and they'll reap a harvest. And it's very much this, well, let's be frank, you self-deny by giving yourself into their ministry. That's where you're sowing a seed. You're basically giving them your money and then they promise that you will be financially rewarded. This is a very different thing. This isn't some sort of, we're not self-denying ourselves because we then, it's not an investment financially for us, right? It's not that we are doing this because we believe that God is, going to increase it tenfold, like how the prosperity preachers speak, right?
Correct. That's exactly right. So it's not like it's not like a 401k or some kind of smooth investment deal. Pure and simple. But there is a principle. Like the Bible does talk that way, but it always talks that way about you deny yourself now because glory's coming. Like God's going to give you. He's going to give you everything. Yeah. So why would you settle for the pittance you could have now in gathering all the wealth you can and sitting on it and enjoying it for your own selfish interest? Why settle for that when God's offering you everything? Jesus died to give you everything. But now he wants you to, he's giving you what he's given you in order that you might use it in the cause of love. And he promises you himself, his presence. He promises you that kind of joy that comes through that. There's a currency exchange that happens. Yes, you sacrifice, say, your wealth, or even if you don't have a lot of wealth, your time, your whatever you've been given, whatever talent you've been given, you put that to use, trusting God, relying on His grace, and putting it to use. And then there's a currency exchange. You don't get maybe the money back exactly, but you get something better. You get Him. You get joy in God.
Yeah. Excellent. What is the prosperity gospel and why is it so dangerous?
I mean, I think that it does two things. One is what we just talked about, where it sees everything in very materialistic, earthly terms, pure and simple.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to thread a needle here in these two books that I've written, where I'm saying I want to affirm the goodness of creation and the goodness of wealth and the goodness of all of these things, and at the same time recognize they're not ultimate.
Yeah.
And that worldliness and greed are real and present and constant dangers for everyone.
Yeah.
And they're the kind of dangers that get you sent to hell. They're not little. Jesus has some strong words for the rich.
Yeah.
And how hard it is for them to enter the kingdom. So that's one danger, is that they see things narrowly. I think actually, in some ways, the bigger danger, because there is truth to the fact that there have been times in my life where I've made a sacrifice and God has blessed it, and it's come back, in ways that I couldn't even have foreseen.
Yeah.
And things have sort of come back around, and God has blessed me in some ways. Okay?
Yeah.
That happens, and the prosperity gospel picks that up. What they lack is a really biblical theology of suffering.
Yeah.
Which so that it's not just that they say if you sow the seed you get the harvest in this life. It's that if you sow the seed, the bad things won't happen to you. And so if the bad things are happening to you, if hard things, it must be because you don't have enough faith.
Yeah.
It must be because you're not doing something right. Because if you're a child of the King, and if you're a child of the King, bad things don't happen to you. Claim your victory. And so something must be deficient in you if you're not. And I think that's evil. That's just flat out unbiblical evil teaching right there. And so one of the chapters in Strangely Bright addresses the question of suffering, because the reality is I'm saying enjoy the things of earth, and you're going to lose all of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're going to lose I remember there was this moment, this was back when I was first developing a lot of the concepts in the book, and I was preaching a sermon at Bethlehem and was on this topic, and I was excited about it, ready to preach on the two approaches to, comparative approach, integrated approach. So I'm at the church working on this, and Piper walks by, and I say, hey, come here real quick. I'm preaching this weekend. I want to tell you what I'm going to preach on. So I kind of walk through the sermon, and I'm talking about you dive into the gifts that God gives, every good and perfect gift. You dive into the gifts, and then you chase them back, and so that you enjoy Him. So you enjoy God and everything in God, so that you enjoy the things of earth, right?
Yeah.
And John looks at me in his typical way, and he goes, until you die. And I was like, well, that's true. That's very true. Until you die. So how does death, how does suffering, how does the loss play into this? And for me, I think this is one of the main burdens I have, is a wrong view of enjoying God's gifts inevitably leads to a wrong view of grieving the loss of His gifts.
Yeah.
So if you feel guilty because you think you're enjoying your family too much, and then your child dies, you're going to feel a kind of guilt in the grief that you feel in that loss, which will hinder your ability to honor God in the grief and to actually heal from the loss. Mm-hmm. So I know people who have felt like when God has taken some gift, usually it's a person, it's a child, it's a parent, it's a sibling, it's a spouse, somebody's dying, and they feel this, my grief is so intense that God must not be pleased with it.
Yeah.
And part of what I'm wanting to say is, no, what joy in God's gifts looks like when they're being torn from our hearts is it looks like lots of tears and weeping and throwing yourself on the floor and crying out and moans. It's sackcloth and ashes. Like that's how Bible characters grieve. That's how Jesus grieves.
Yeah. And
so we shouldn't think that we have to take it, sort of with a stiff upper lip and be stoic about loss in order to honor God. We don't want these things to be too precious to us. Mm. Instead, we're going to press into that pain, and we're going to say, God, the reason. So my dad died about 7 years ago, and of dementia, Alzheimer's, so long, painful, slow death. I miss my dad. I wish he was still here. But the only way I'm going to honor God in that is if I press into that pain and say, God, you gave me a dad because you wanted me to know what you're like.
Yeah.
And so losing my dad hurts because I want to know what you're like. Like that's the ultimate reason. And so I miss him because he was a good and perfect gift to me.
Yeah.
And so I want people to be able to grieve well, and that's something that the health, wealth, and prosperity gospel can't absorb, can't do, they totally wreck people because of their theology of suffering. And I want people to have a really good theology of suffering that grieves the way that Job grieves, that David grieves, and that Jesus grieves.
Yeah, so helpful. Thank you. You've written how baseball, which, by the way, if you're listening in the UK, that's basically cricket.
I would say it's cricket, but glorified. It's what cricket always wanted to be, but never could quite until it was planted in a new soil across the pond. And then in that new soil, it grew up and became baseball.
Joe, don't be surprised if that don't make the edit. That little bit there.
Okay, all right. If that gets cut, I'll just know it was censorship.
Yeah. You've written how baseball is a helpful illustration of the ideas that you present in your book. Tell us why that is.
So, yeah, I grew up in a baseball family. My grandfather played and managed in the major leagues, and my dad was in baseball, the business side of baseball for a number of years. And I have two brothers. We all played baseball growing up. I coached Little League for my boys. I love all things about baseball. And so one of the chapters in the book is basically me reveling in the goodness, all the different ways, not all of them, but a good number of the ways that I have been blessed by baseball. Whether it's the kind of recreational, the health aspect, it's fun, you get to run around, blood pumping. Whether it's some of the kind of more strategic, there's strategy involved, just like there is in lots of different sports. That's enjoyable. The camaraderie with teammates or coaching with kids or whatever. There's all kinds of good things that are happening in baseball. And really what I wanted to do was to basically, it's a case study. It's saying, here's one of mine. This is one of the gifts that God's given to me and that I enjoy. And here's how I'm thinking through it. Here's how I'm trying to receive it with gratitude and chase it back to the source and glorify God in it. And then it's basically then an exhortation and a commendation to the reader to say, now you go find yours. Maybe it's not baseball. Maybe it's cricket. Maybe it's soccer or whatever. Maybe it has nothing to do with sports at all. Maybe it's knitting. Who knows? There's so many, and you shouldn't feel restricted to other people's. You should find yours. What are the good and perfect gifts that God has put in front of you? And that he's shouting at you, right? That a big part of the book is the heavens declare the glory of God, and not just the heavens. Everything God made in some way reflects Him. Yeah. And so, are you attentive? Do you hear what He's saying? Are you alive and awake and alert to the way that He's revealing Himself to you in all that He's made? And so that last chapter is really kind of let's get real concrete and give you a little window into my life, and then sort of turn you loose with the boundaries in place of these tests, like generosity and how do you endure suffering? Do you curse God? All of these tests are there to make sure that we don't go off the rails and become idolaters. But then within those boundaries, man, God has lavished us. He is so kind, and He's lavished us with this world so that we would know Him in it. And so go find Him. Yeah.
Brilliant. I know a lot of people have jumped on The Wonderful Works of God by Bavnik. Have you read that? Has that been an influence for you in writing this book?
It hasn't. I haven't had a chance to read that one. I've read a number of other things by him and find him to be an incredibly perceptive theologian and very pastoral too. Yeah. But I think there's, I don't think I'm saying anything new in what I'm writing. And so when people find resonances, there's self-conscious sources for me, people that I know have influenced, like C.S. Lewis and Jonathan Edwards and people like that. Yeah. But then there's also just we're all reading the same Bible and saying God is this. Yeah. I do know. I think Bavink has a place where he talks about just the different metaphors that Scripture uses to sort of communicate what God is like. And I remember reading that and thinking, yes, that's right. When God's He's a consuming fire, He's a rock, He's a lion. Yeah. All of these things are earthly things that are revealing something, a little window into what God is like. And so we should really pay attention. We should study the works of the Lord, the wonderful works of God, so that we can know Him. Yeah. Yeah. I know you've spent a lot of time around John Piper. What's he like, and what's your favourite John Piper moment? Oh man, the Until You Die one may be one of my favorites. I've got another one. I don't know if it will quite resonate with the UK audience, but I'll tell it. So John is the same on stage as he on a platform as he is off. He has the same God-centered, pastoral life is blood earnest but deeply joyful. He's incredibly thoughtful. And he's been a great mentor and friend for the last 15 years. And I'm grateful that I get to partner with him in a whole host of ways at Bethlehem. So I'm really grateful for him and his family. Probably, one of the favorite stories. Like I said, I'm from Texas, and I'm sure that, you guys over there across the pond have stereotypes of Americans, and I think that Texans have their own sort of independent stereotype, right? And some of it's deserved. Most of it's probably deserved. So I'm from Texas, and I remember one time sitting in a sermon that Piper was preaching, and he was talking about living in the inner city here in Minneapolis, and trusting God and not. And I think he basically in a loud exclamatory voice said, talking about safety and things like that. And he says, there's never been a gun in my house. And the thing is that when my wife and I first moved to Minneapolis, we actually ended up living in his basement for about 3 or 4 years. He has a basement apartment. And so my wife and I lived there. And so when he said, there's never been a gun in my house, I'm sitting in the audience going, that's not quite true. Because you can take the boy out of Texas, but you can take Texas out of the boy. And so there may or may not have been a long, tall Texan with a firearm, standing watch at the pastor's house whenever the people are banging on the doors. So that's a fun Piper story. He gets a kick out of that one too.
That's brilliant. I love that. So good, Joe. I don't know if you'd ever have time, so this might be a silly question, but do you have any other books or projects planned at the moment?
Actually, I do.
Do you? Wow. Okay.
So I've got Strangely Bright's coming out, obviously in the next. It comes out in August. Yeah. And then I think it's coming out in February. I actually have a book on fighting sexual sin, pornography, things like that. That's a major area of focus I've had in my ministry. I've worked with college students, and so that's a perennial kind of struggle. And so over the years, I've kind of worked with a lot of guys. I've benefited from it from my own struggles when I was in college, and had to really work through how do you fight this insidious, accessible, anonymous sin in a way that's faithful. And so the book's called More Than a Battle. And it's basically an attempt to, there's kind of 3 different metaphors that often get used in talking about the fight with sexual sin in particular. There's the battle metaphor, so we're fighting a battle, a struggle against lust. There's a kind of an addiction metaphor where it really focusing on the bodily elements of that sin, and where you want to kind of break free from an addiction. And then there's a kind of brokenness component where we need healing from our sexual brokenness. And so there's 3 different kind of lenses. And I find that different counselors and pastors and authors tend to focus on one almost to the exclusion of the other. So they either play up the military metaphor of the fight, or they play up the brokenness metaphor, or they look at it as addiction. And I just really wanted to say, I think all 3 of these are true. They're really good, different lenses. And so what if we looked at this struggle kind of holistically like that? And so it's a very practical book. It's the kind of book I wrote it basically with the idea that churches could basically say to, maybe their men's ministry or something like that, hey, here's a good book that you guys could go through. So guys who might be struggling with that sin, and you have a pastor or somebody, mentor, who's going to lead them through to try to win that battle and break free from that addiction and be healed from that brokenness. And so that one's coming out in February. I'm excited about that one. I think, and I hope it's a help to people.
Well, it sounds really helpful. Joe, we'll have to have you back in February so that we can talk about that in more detail. That'd be good.
I'd love it.
Brilliant. So, Joe, last question. How do people get in touch with you? I know you're on Twitter.
Yep, I'm on Twitter. So Joe_Rigney is on Twitter. If you can always email the school, Bethlehem College and Seminary, and they can get any communications to me. I get emails from time to time forwarded to me. Yeah. So I'm hopeful that if people find the book helpful that I'm happy to answer questions and I get encouraged when I hear from people that things that I've written have blessed them. It energizes me to want to keep writing and being faithful in my ministry there.
Yeah, excellent. Well, what we do is we'll put the link to the school, to your email address from the school. We'll put a link to the book and your Twitter handle in the description below this video, so you can check that out. Joe, thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed speaking to you today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much.